Do you have any studies on the barriers for the faculty members to engage students in research?
Yes, lots. I experience them every week. Time is a big one, and so it's hard. I mean, so I'm pulled in a lot of different directions, and oftentimes it feels like I don't have time to meet with a particular student or to meet with a group of people that for a project that we're working on. On the other hand, it's sort of a little bit of a paradox. I have a hard time, it's hard to make the time to do that. On the other hand, working with students on research is also part of what makes me able to be productive. So it's sort of, I need that time in order to be able to produce papers and publications. On the other hand, I feel the struggle in making the time to make it happen. So time is an issue. Some of the barriers, so students, sometimes, I mean, it's an interaction between the students and I. Sometimes there's a communication issue. I assume that they know some things, it turns out that they don't know them, and it can take sometimes weeks or months for us to finally arrive at understanding exactly what I mean when I'm saying things and the position that they're in. And as I've done this more and more, when I first encountered those things, that felt very inefficient, right? And I would get very frustrated by it. And I'm learning that it's a part of the process. So, and we just have to work through those things, but it still feels frustrating and a challenge. Sometimes there's also a challenge in setting out sort of clear expectations, and there can be a challenge with students meeting those expectations. So occasionally we'll have students who we say, okay, we're dividing up the jobs and what people need to do, and the student will say, okay, I'll do that, and it turns out they don't do it, and they don't do it in time. So it's important very early on when a group is working together to sort of lay out what the expectations are and what happens when someone doesn't meet those expectations. So we're pretty clear at this point that if that happens too often, then someone won't be allowed, for example, to be in the research group anymore. If they're working with me individually, I sort of reserve the right to say, I can't continue to work with you like this because you're not producing what you say you're going to produce. I'm trying to think if there are lots of other challenges in this, but one of the best challenges is on the flip side. Some students are really, really good. But they want my approval and my attention through the whole process. And so I don't need them in my office and in my inbox every day. And I have to teach them to breathe and take the time and that it's okay, that they know what they're doing and that they can keep working on it without continually checking in with me. That's a good problem, a good challenge to have. They're doing great work, they're doing good work, but they just want my approval all the time, and they don't need that. So helping to teach them that that's okay, and to help instill the confidence that they need to be able to do the work. Is that?
Thanks for the nice presentation. I'd like to ask about research in undergraduate. Actually, what is the goal for the students doing research in during their study? Because sometimes or even often I observe that for undergraduate students, they are only asked as a data collector, and then you're writing a thesis without knowing what is the importance of the topic and high school methodology, and then because it is obligatory to have thesis that they do that. So that's the fact.
So I think you're speaking to the quality of the experience, and for really good undergraduate research experiences, the goal is for them to be able to understand the research process not abstractly, but practically, because they've gone through it. They know the research process because they've seen the steps. And it's also, at its best, a way for students to understand how thinking and problem solving happen within a field, within an area of study. And so they're learning how to think, they're being socialized into the research function of a particular field, and they're learning what the research, all the different pieces of the research process. I often, both for undergraduates and graduate students, understanding that almost every research project comes with compromises. I often have students that want to do the perfect research project, and eventually I have to let them know that there's no such thing. You have to compromise in certain areas, and that happens in every process. So helping them learn those things, that's where it happens best. But as happens at universities actually quite often, sometimes you can take a really good idea and try to make it happen more broadly. And when you do that, some of the experiences will be good, and some of them will not. And sometimes we involve students in the research process, and we basically, we don't give them insight into the field, we don't give them insight into the research process. We make them do very specific tasks. There may be some benefit to that. They get to learn how, thinking about the sciences or in medicine, they might get to learn a particular technique, the way to operate a certain set of machines or things. They might learn how to do some sampling. But it isn't, I think, until they see the full process and how they're contributing to it, and that they might get how they're involved in those things, that's when they get the more powerful learning. The other stuff is very technical learning, or just learning how to make copies. I've heard of students who get assigned to a lab and their job is to make copies. Well, I'm not sure that's undergraduate research. That's copy making. But it falls under an undergraduate research program. Hopefully that doesn't happen very often, and I think it's a good reminder to think about what are we aiming for in these experiences. And to me, it's about learning about the full research process and learning about how scientists think.
Thank you very much, Professor. I would like to ask one question actually. So since since we cannot engage in all students or impose all students in this such kind of students engagement program, so how about when is the correct timing to start to involve students in such a student engagement? Is it from the beginning when the students in the junior or freshman year, or starts in the middle, or maybe in the later? As we know, the quality of each student is different, and also undergraduate students somehow in the recent year I observed that their perception, their knowledge about, for example, about starting research is not as we expect. sometimes it's lower, but of course several students are quite bright enough to get that they're really quick to understand or quick to catch the essence of the research and then they can do research practically, but most of them are no. So can you suggest to us the correct time to start with focus? Thank you.
So I'll answer this in two different ways. So one, just about engagement in general, all of those different indicators. So engagement needs to happen right from the beginning, in that way. Some forms. But as students learn more and become more mature through their time, the nature and types of engagement should change. And so, it should be from the beginning and it should last to the end, but it should be changing during that time. For high impact practices, some research and some scholars believe students should be involved in at least one during their first year, and then maybe at least 3 by the time that they finish. Now, some might be better suited to the first year than others. So learning communities are something that get used in the first year quite regularly. And undergraduate research is often something that's done toward the end, maybe in their junior or senior year. Interestingly, there are some people at least in the US, I think maybe some other places, that are trying to flip our assumptions around some of those things. So when we put undergraduate research at the end of the college experience, we say things, and I say these too, like students need to learn a certain amount before they can do this stuff. So they need to take this class and this class, and they need to be a little bit more mature and all this. There have been some people who experimented with moving undergraduate research right to the beginning. And those folks have had good results. And so I think the question is more about how you're going to tailor the experience to the place where the students are. So undergraduate research can come at the beginning or it can come at the end. But how do you tailor it to where the student is? And so if it's going to happen at the beginning, how do you help support the learning that needs to happen for them to be able to do the tasks that they need? If it's going to come at the end, how do you communicate to them the skills and knowledge that they're drawn from the classes that they've taken, so that they understand why they had to take those classes in order to do this experience? And learning communities, although usually done towards the beginning of somebody's undergraduate experience, I can also imagine having groups of seniors together that are taking the same classes and possibly living together in the same space, and that also working really well for senior students or fourth-year students. So I think it can happen. It can follow patterns that we think about, but we also shouldn't be afraid to change those patterns if we come up with a good idea and a way to implement it that will work.
Okay, so very interesting remark in your last answer. So I also want to support that we should do the undergraduate research in the early beginning of the study, because I have read some of the studies that if we let the class traditionally, we will get the student will get taught in 1 hour after the lecture term, and then it's more important that they do the research. So some of the study, like maybe you have also watched in the tech sudah Damitra, so that someone that cannot read and even they cannot read anything, they can learn directly in 1 or 2 hours about the computer. So it's like the project of bullying or something like that. So but your discussion is really nice about the integrated research in level 2. You have to study that the large class is more significant. Is that right? So how is that? So maybe you can go to the level 2. The integration. Yeah. So the size is large and it is significant is high. So
But the effect, the coefficient is negative. So at large institutions, controlling for the type and the selectivity, at large institutions, students are less likely than students at small institutions. And at medium-sized institutions, students are less likely than those at small institutions. So if you're at a medium or a large institution, you're less likely than you are at a small institution to do undergraduate research. And just a point about your first comment, I think it goes to motivation, right? So a student who is in an undergraduate research process early on, they'll encounter problems, they'll encounter how they don't know, right? I need to make this machine work, and I don't know how to do it. You know, I need to know how osmosis occurs. And I don't know, but I need to know how in order to do this next thing. That can provide the motivation for learning, as opposed to an instructor standing up and saying, this is osmosis, and this is how it occurs. Take notes, and there'll be an exam on Friday. And after Friday, you'll know osmosis, right? What we know about that model is that some students never learn. Some students learn it very well. And some students learn it very temporarily. They learn it for Friday and then have forgotten by Saturday. And what we know about the other model, right, when they encounter the problem genuinely, they're more likely to learn, and that learning is more likely to last. Because they needed it. It was important to their endeavor. So that's a rationale for doing that. That's exactly what problem-based learning is about. Right? Encounter the problem, the reason that you have to learn. And then go do the learning so that you can come back and work on the problem.
you have more questions about the graduate research, about the grad process. You said it is very difficult project for one semester?
Yes.
And at the end of the semester there is competition. So what kind of competition do you
At the end of the semester, there's a paper. At the end of the semester, there's a paper. And then this line here is not as red as the other ones because some students decide to pursue publication after that. And that goes on after the end of the semester.
So you do with journal or is it
They'll submit their papers to journals. We run a journal. Our students actually run a journal. But then there are other journals, they'll submit them. So we've had students publish these papers in our journal and in other journals. But not everyone, just some.
Yeah, one aspect about the link between the graduate and the undergraduate. In the school, we are trying to have like a big umbrella research of subject. Yeah. And then in this research groups, there will be like the professors and then the graduate students, and we can also some undergraduates. Is there any example of this kind of arrangement?
I think in the sciences there's often examples of how labs are structured with the different linking of things, and I think of basically two different models that operate within this. One is the there's a little bit of hierarchy based on experience and knowledge, right? So you've got professor, postdoc, doctoral student, undergraduate student and all this stuff. And it's good in sort of one of those teams to have those different levels of experience because people ask different types of questions. Certain questions can be asked by different groups and answered by different groups. So undergraduate students can be taught by the doctoral students how to do certain things, and the undergraduates can also get answers from the postdocs or the professor. And they're tapping into different types of knowledge, different levels of experience. But also then there's, usually in those contexts, there's time for, and this is sort of the second model, but the group to think and work together. And my experience and my understanding in those times, the sort of hierarchies decrease a little bit in those experiences, and people are encouraged just to throw out questions and ideas and give feedback and other things. And my understanding is sometimes the undergraduate student will ask a question because they just genuinely don't know yet, they don't have enough experience, but it's a really important question that the people who have a lot of experience, because they have a lot of experience, didn't think about that. And so you draw some benefit from having those two groups of students. Now, if you rely too much on the hierarchy, the undergraduate student won't get very much time with the professor, and they might not ever get time where they get to think freely and stuff. So you sort of, my understanding is you have to have both of those models operating simultaneously. Time where you're drawing on the different knowledge and experience, but also time where people are willing, in a more equal way, able to raise questions, throw ideas out there, and stuff. So that comes to mind. In other areas, I don't know of any other models. I think I guess the other model I can think of comes from education, where you might have a professor and doctoral students working with pre-service, so students who are learning to be teachers, and they might work sort of as a research group, but people have different roles. So the professor oversees the whole work. The doctoral students are charged with implementing a lot of the particular research process. The undergraduate students might be a part of the research or a part of sort of the actual study, like they're participants and other things. And each person has a role, they learn different things in those processes. But to me, that's not, you're not aiming in that situation for the undergraduate students to learn how to be researchers. You're aiming for them to do parts of what they're doing as learning to teach, and hopefully through the experience learning a little bit about the research process, but they're not as involved. So those are the things that come to mind.
Okay, last question, please.
In all of this discussion of the student research engagement, as I heard that most of the project from professors are top-down professor as a project, and they offer to student who wants to be involved. But what about if we reverse the condition? Student has a presentation from this GIP process, student has a presentation, and professor interest. I like your research story. What about I have a grant? What about to make it? I'm talking about the XY generation in classic management. The X generation, they are working where you have to push them. But the Y generation, maybe for all the professors in this room, they are like Y generation. They are working only need for some spark, and they like to burn all of the process.
Yeah, so the thing that comes to mind for me, so first, I mean, this is exactly what I was talking about with this third part, that students come with the ideas and they come to me and do this. Now, that's one way, but a student, in order for that to happen, a student has to take the initiative and know, and they have to know that I will potentially be interested. And sometimes students don't either feel confident enough or know which faculty member to go to with their idea, which professor to go to. And so I think it's good to try to provide some experiences for students to be able to raise their ideas in areas where professors will be around and be able to either offer feedback or to tell them, hey, that's a great idea. I've got a project that I think you could join up with, or I've got some grant money, or whatever, however it works. But, to be able to do it, and actually, I get back to the U.S. on Tuesday, and I start teaching a class on Wednesday. It'll be interesting. My students are going to have a very different experience with me this year. I'll be very tired when I teach the first class. But when in that class, at the end of the class, this is doctoral students who are working on their dissertation ideas. And at the end of the class, we're going to have a sort of working session where students, we invite other doctoral students and other professors to come. And the students will sit at tables with other students and other professors from the program and explain their dissertation ideas. And it's just a chance for other people to learn about something that we don't often get exposure to. Students in the middle, right? Like or toward the beginning of a research project. And so to understand that and to get a little bit of feedback, but it's also intentionally an opportunity for professors to learn about people's dissertation ideas so that they can say, that's really interesting. I'd like to be on your committee, or I might be a good chair, I might be a good person to help you with that. And so I believe strongly that we have to encourage that kind of thinking. I mean, if students are thinking of their own research projects, that's not something to discourage, that's something to encourage. That's how we learn how to do it. And so, but we have to find the ways. The last thing I'll say about that, though, is sometimes professors aren't the best planners of activities that would encourage this. And so if students think this is a good idea, I always encourage my students, like, if you want to do that, do it. Professors will likely come, especially if you invite them, treat them well, and so make the activity. You guys do it. If this is important to you, then do it. So professors should try, even though we're not always that good, we should try to do these more, but also students should take the initiative sometimes and make these things happen. If they do it once, it might be that the professors decide it's so good that we should keep doing it over and over again.
Okay. I think we have to finish at this time. Yeah. I think we have to understand about what was the meaning of student engagement and also the application for research in research and undergraduate and also in postgraduate. And again, I to make sure that this is the first encounter, the first discussion, and we try to develop this engagement into more practical application or implementation in okay. Thank you very much, Martin. Yeah, and then maybe I have some small talk for you. This is the part of the also for them. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Thank you for having me and enjoyed my time. And good luck. And just a reminder, there are people here who are working on student engagement and they're working with the survey. It's so it sounds like you all will be working on this, but there are others as well. And so hopefully there'll be resources here for you at UVM.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terima kasih. Dan ini ada tim dari survei dan riset mengenai studi engagement di UGM dan kita akan terus mencoba untuk pengembangan melakukan termasuk dari ke arah environment kampus yang memicu engagement. Oke, saya terima kasih atas kehadirannya dan nanti kita ketemu lagi pada pertemuan selanjutnya. Sekian dan terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.